Question 1. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the volume of transactions processed by BidCorp's trading desk, exceeding historical averages by a considerable margin. However, a review of the associated trade confirmations reveals a higher than usual number of minor discrepancies in settlement instructions. What is the most appropriate course of action for the responsible manager at BidCorp? Option A. Report the increased transaction volume as a success to senior management, while omitting any mention of the settlement discrepancies to avoid raising concerns. Option B. Immediately investigate the root cause of the discrepancies in settlement instructions, cross-referencing them with BidCorp's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines to ensure compliance and identify any potential systemic issues. Option C. Assume the discrepancies are minor clerical errors that will resolve themselves and continue to process transactions at the increased volume to maximize revenue. Option D. Focus on celebrating the increased transaction volume as a positive indicator of business growth and defer a detailed review of settlement discrepancies until after the current busy period has subsided. Correct answer is B. Immediately investigate the root cause of the discrepancies in settlement instructions, cross-referencing them with BidCorp's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines to ensure compliance and identify any potential systemic issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at BidCorp to interpret performance data in the context of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct, rather than solely focusing on immediate financial outcomes. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to overlook or misinterpret information that might indicate a breach of regulations or ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with the imperative to act with integrity and within the bounds of the law. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the performance metrics, cross-referencing them with BidCorp's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes understanding the root cause of any anomalies and ensuring that BidCorp's operations remain compliant with all applicable laws and ethical standards. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible corporate behavior, which are fundamental to maintaining trust with stakeholders and avoiding legal repercussions. By seeking clarification and ensuring adherence to established procedures, this approach upholds the integrity of BidCorp's business practices. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on achieving the target without investigating the underlying performance metrics fails to uphold regulatory obligations. This could lead to the perpetuation of non-compliant activities, even if unintentional, exposing BidCorp to significant penalties, reputational damage, and loss of business. Another incorrect approach, which involves selectively reporting only the positive aspects of the performance metrics while ignoring concerning trends, constitutes a misrepresentation of facts. This is ethically unsound and can violate regulations related to accurate financial reporting and disclosure. A third incorrect approach, which involves making assumptions about the cause of the performance deviations without proper investigation or consultation, risks making decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate information. This can lead to flawed strategies that do not address the actual issues and may inadvertently lead to further regulatory breaches. Professionals at BidCorp should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the performance data. This involves identifying any deviations from expected results and then systematically investigating the reasons behind these deviations. This investigation should involve consulting relevant internal policies, procedures, and regulatory frameworks. If the investigation reveals potential compliance issues or ethical concerns, the next step is to escalate these findings to the appropriate internal stakeholders or compliance officers for further review and guidance. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and ethically sound, prioritizing the long-term health and reputation of BidCorp. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a data breach related to client information stored by BidCorp. A senior manager from another department requests immediate access to specific client project details to inform an urgent strategic decision. You are aware that this information is highly sensitive and subject to strict confidentiality agreements with BidCorp's clients. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Acknowledge the request and inform the senior manager that you will initiate the formal process to obtain the necessary approvals and access to the client project details, explaining that this process ensures compliance with Bid Corp's data protection policies and client confidentiality agreements. Option B. Immediately provide the senior manager with the requested client project details from your own knowledge, as the urgency of the strategic decision outweighs the potential risks. Option C. Refuse to provide any information, stating that client data is confidential and cannot be shared under any circumstances, without offering an alternative or explaining the proper procedure. Option D. Attempt to recall and summarize the client project details from memory to provide a quick overview, as exact figures are not critical for the strategic decision. The correct answer is A. Acknowledge the request and inform the senior manager that you will initiate the formal process to obtain the necessary approvals and access to the client project details, explaining that this process ensures compliance with Bid Corp's data protection policies and client confidentiality agreements. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict confidentiality obligations owed to Bid Corp's clients. The pressure to provide a comprehensive answer quickly can lead to overlooking critical compliance requirements. Careful judgment is essential to ensure that any information shared, even internally, adheres to Bid Corp's established data handling policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves acknowledging the request and then proactively seeking to obtain the necessary information through authorized channels, while clearly communicating the limitations and the process for obtaining it. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and client confidentiality. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of data protection and professional conduct expected of employees at Bid Corp, which likely mandate that client-specific information is only accessed and disseminated through approved procedures to prevent unauthorized disclosure and maintain trust. An incorrect approach of directly providing the requested client data without verification or authorization would constitute a serious breach of confidentiality and potentially violate data privacy regulations. This could lead to significant reputational damage for Bid Corp and severe consequences for the employee involved. Another incorrect approach of refusing to provide any information, even internally, without explaining the process for obtaining it, could hinder legitimate business operations and create an impression of unhelpfulness. While confidentiality is paramount, a complete lack of cooperation can be detrimental. A third incorrect approach of attempting to recall or approximate the data from memory without consulting official records introduces a high risk of inaccuracy. This could lead to flawed decision-making based on misinformation, which is professionally unacceptable and could have negative business implications for Bid Corp. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Identifying the core request and its potential implications. 2. Recalling and applying relevant company policies and regulatory obligations regarding data access and confidentiality. 3. Communicating clearly and professionally about what can and cannot be done, and outlining the correct procedure for obtaining the required information. 4. Prioritizing accuracy and compliance over speed when dealing with sensitive client data. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a key client of Bid Corp, currently in negotiations for a significant new contract, has requested access to Bid Corp's internal projections for a specific market segment that are not yet publicly disclosed. The client states this information is crucial for their final decision-making process and assures Bid Corp that it will be kept strictly confidential. How should a Bid Corp representative respond to this request? Option A. Advise the client to research publicly available market data and reports that might offer similar insights, without directly addressing the specific projections requested. Option B. Politely decline the request, explaining that Bid Corp is bound by regulations that prohibit the disclosure of material non-public information prior to its public release. Option C. Inform the client that Bid Corp will review the request internally and provide an update once a decision is made, without specifying the nature of the review. Option D. Provide the requested projections to the client, emphasizing the confidentiality agreement and the importance of securing the new contract. The correct answer is B. Politely decline the request, explaining that Bid Corp is bound by regulations that prohibit the disclosure of material non-public information prior to its public release. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Bid Corp employees due to the inherent conflict between client relationship management and regulatory compliance. The pressure to secure a new contract with a key client, coupled with the client's request for information that may be considered material non-public information, MNPI, requires careful judgment to uphold ethical standards and regulatory obligations. Misjudging this situation could lead to severe reputational damage, regulatory penalties, and legal repercussions for both Bid Corp and its employees. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves politely declining the client's request for MNPI and explaining that Bid Corp is bound by regulations that prohibit the disclosure of such information prior to its public release. This upholds Bid Corp's commitment to fair market practices and regulatory compliance. Specifically, this aligns with the principles of insider trading prevention and market abuse regulation, which mandate that all market participants have equal access to material information. By refusing to provide the MNPI, Bid Corp demonstrates its adherence to these critical regulatory frameworks, thereby protecting the integrity of the market and its own reputation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing the requested MNPI to the client, even with the assurance of confidentiality, constitutes a serious breach of regulatory requirements. This action would be considered market manipulation or insider trading, as it grants the client an unfair advantage based on privileged information. Such a failure to comply with regulations designed to ensure market fairness can result in significant fines, sanctions, and criminal charges for individuals and the firm. Suggesting the client seek the information from other publicly available sources without directly addressing the MNPI request, while seemingly neutral, fails to adequately address the core issue. It could be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent the direct refusal, potentially leading the client to believe that Bid Corp is indirectly facilitating access to information cannot legally provide. This approach lacks the clarity and directness required for robust regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Delaying a response to the client's request while Bid Corp internally assesses the situation without a clear communication strategy can also be problematic. While internal review is necessary, an indefinite delay without informing the client of the regulatory constraints can lead to misunderstandings and damage the client relationship, potentially without resolving the underlying compliance issue. The priority must be to address the regulatory implications immediately. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should first identify the potential regulatory implications of the client's request. They must then consult Bid Corp's internal compliance policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to the law and ethical principles over short-term business gains. Clear, direct, and professional communication with the client, explaining the regulatory limitations without being accusatory, is paramount. If there is any ambiguity, seeking guidance from the compliance department or legal counsel is essential. Question 4. The efficiency study reveals that a Bid Corp procurement manager, Sarah Chen, is responsible for evaluating bids for a significant new technology contract. It has come to her attention that one of the leading vendors submitting a proposal is a company where her sibling holds a senior management position. Sarah is aware of the potential for this relationship to create a perceived or actual conflict of interest. What is the most appropriate course of action for Sarah to take in this situation, adhering strictly to Bid Corp's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks governing procurement integrity? Option A. Sarah should immediately disclose her sibling's senior management position at the vendor company to Bid Corp's compliance officer or designated authority and await further guidance on how to proceed, which may include recusal from the evaluation process. Option B. Sarah should subtly favor the vendor where her sibling works, believing that this will ensure a strong partnership for Bid Corp and that her sibling's company is the most capable. Option C. Sarah should proceed with the evaluation as planned, ensuring she remains objective and makes the decision based solely on the merits of the bid, as her personal relationship should not influence her professional judgment. Option D. Sarah should avoid any contact with the vendor and ensure their bid is not considered to prevent any appearance of impropriety, without consulting any internal authority. The correct answer is C. Sarah should proceed with the evaluation as planned, ensuring she remains objective and makes the decision based solely on the merits of the bid, as her personal relationship should not influence her professional judgment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Bid Corp employees by requiring them to navigate a situation where a potential conflict of interest may arise due to personal relationships influencing business decisions. The challenge lies in upholding Bid Corp's commitment to fair and objective procurement processes while respecting individual relationships. Strict adherence to regulatory frameworks and internal policies is paramount to prevent even the appearance of impropriety, which can damage Bid Corp's reputation and lead to regulatory scrutiny. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the personal relationship to the relevant compliance officer or designated authority within Bid Corp. This action demonstrates transparency and allows Bid Corp to implement appropriate safeguards, such as recusal from decision-making processes or enhanced oversight, to ensure the integrity of the procurement. This aligns with regulatory requirements for managing conflicts of interest, which often mandate proactive disclosure and mitigation strategies to maintain fair competition and prevent undue influence. Ethical principles of integrity and objectivity are upheld by prioritizing the company's interests and regulatory compliance over personal connections. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that involves proceeding with the evaluation without disclosure risks violating Bid Corp's conflict of interest policy and relevant regulations. This failure to disclose creates an undisclosed conflict, potentially leading to biased decision-making and undermining the fairness of the procurement process. Can also result in reputational damage and regulatory penalties for Bid Corp. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly favor the vendor due to the personal relationship without explicit disclosure. This is a direct breach of ethical conduct and regulatory obligations. It constitutes a form of unfair dealing and can lead to legal challenges, loss of trust from other bidders, and severe repercussions for Bid Corp and the individuals involved. Finally, an approach that involves avoiding the vendor entirely without proper consultation or a clear policy basis is also problematic. While it might seem like a way to avoid conflict, it could lead to missed opportunities or unfair exclusion of a potentially suitable vendor without a legitimate, documented reason. This can also raise questions about Bid Corp's procurement practices and potentially lead to challenges from the excluded vendor. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should follow a structured decision-making process. 1. Identify the potential conflict. Recognize any personal relationships that could influence professional judgment. 2. Consult policies and regulations. Review Bid Corp's internal policies on conflicts of interest and relevant external regulatory guidelines. 3. Disclose proactively. Immediately report the potential conflict to the appropriate authority within Bid Corp. 4. Follow guidance. Adhere strictly to the instructions provided by compliance or management regarding recusal, oversight, or other mitigation measures. 5. Document actions. Keep records of disclosures and any actions taken to manage the conflict. Question 5. Investigation of a Bid Corp client's trading activity reveals a pattern that strongly suggests the client may be acting on material non-public information. The employee observing this pattern is unsure of the exact regulatory definition of insider trading, but is confident that the activity is highly suspicious and could violate financial market regulations. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the Bid Corp employee? Option A. Directly contact the client to inquire about their trading strategy and the source of their information. Option B. Immediately report the suspicious trading activity to Bid Corp's compliance department. Option C. Continue to monitor the client's activity without taking any immediate action, assuming it might be a coincidence. Option D. Discuss the suspicious trading activity with a trusted colleague in another department to get their opinion. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the suspicious trading activity to Bid Corp's compliance department. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Bid Corp employees due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the need to report potential regulatory breaches. The firm's reputation and legal standing are at stake, requiring careful judgment to balance these competing interests. The correct approach involves discreetly escalating the matter internally through the designated compliance channels at Bid Corp. This is the professionally sound decision, because it adheres to Bid Corp's internal policies and regulatory obligations. By reporting the suspected insider trading to the compliance department, the employee is fulfilling their duty to act with integrity and to uphold the regulatory framework governing financial markets. This internal reporting mechanism is designed to investigate such allegations thoroughly and confidentially, minimizing disruption and potential reputational damage to both the client and bid corp, while ensuring that any necessary regulatory reporting is handled by the appropriate individuals within the firm. An incorrect approach would be to directly confront the client about the suspected insider trading. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses bid corp's established procedures, potentially jeopardizes the investigation by alerting the client prematurely, and could expose bid corp to legal repercussions for mishandling sensitive information or failing to report a suspected breach. It also undermines the authority and role of the compliance department. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the suspicion and take no action. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound. Failing to report a suspected breach of insider trading regulations constitutes a dereliction of duty and could expose bid corp and the employee to significant penalties. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to market integrity and bid corp's compliance culture. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to discuss the suspicion with colleagues outside of the formal compliance reporting structure. This violates client confidentiality and could lead to the spread of unsubstantiated rumors, damaging both the client's and bid corp's reputations. It also circumvents the proper channels for investigation and resolution. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to internal policies and regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Recognizing a potential issue that may violate regulations or ethical standards. 2. Consulting internal policies and procedures for guidance on reporting and handling such matters. 3. Escalating the issue through the designated internal channels, e.g., compliance department, in a confidential and professional manner. 4. Avoiding direct confrontation or informal discussions that could compromise the investigation or confidentiality. Question 6. Strategic planning requires bid corp to assess the onboarding of a new, high-value client. The sales team is eager to finalize the deal within the week, citing significant potential revenue. However, the initial due diligence has flagged some minor discrepancies in the client's provided documentation. The compliance department has advised a more in-depth review, which would likely delay the onboarding process by 2 weeks. The sales director is pushing for an expedited onboarding, suggesting that the discrepancies are minor and can be addressed post-onboarding to meet the client's timeline. What is the most appropriate course of action for bid corp's compliance team to ensure adherence to UK regulatory requirements? Option A. Delay the onboarding process until all discrepancies are fully investigated and resolved to the satisfaction of the compliance department, even if it means losing the client. Option B. Escalate the matter to senior management for a decision on whether to accept a higher risk profile for this client to facilitate the immediate onboarding. Option C. Expedite the onboarding process by accepting the client's self-certification for certain verification steps, with a plan to conduct a more thorough review later to balance business needs with compliance. Option D. Proceed with onboarding the client immediately, documenting the discrepancies to be resolved after the client is fully onboarded, to meet the sales team's timeline and secure the revenue. The correct answer is D. Proceed with onboarding the client immediately, documenting the discrepancies to be resolved after the client is fully onboarded, to meet the sales team's timeline and secure the revenue. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for bid corp's compliance team due to the inherent conflict between aggressive business development and the stringent requirements of the UK's regulatory framework, specifically the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) handbook. The pressure to secure a new client quickly, coupled with the potential for significant revenue, creates an environment where shortcuts might seem appealing. However, the FCA's rules on client onboarding, anti-money laundering (AML), and Know Your Customer (KIC) procedures are non-negotiable and designed to protect both the firm and the integrity of the financial system. A hasty onboarding process risks regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and potential financial penalties. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented due diligence process for the prospective client, adhering strictly to bid corp's internal AML/KYC policies, which are themselves mandated by FCA regulations. This includes verifying the client's identity, understanding the source of their funds, assessing the nature of their business, and identifying any potential risks. This meticulous approach ensures compliance with the FCA's principles for businesses, particularly Principle 1, integrity, and Principle 3, customers' interests, and specific rules within the AML module of the FCA Handbook. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible business conduct and risk management, safeguarding BidCorp from regulatory sanctions and reputational harm. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over due diligence would fail to adequately identify and mitigate risks associated with the new client. This could lead to facilitating financial crime, a direct contravention of AML regulations and the FCA's objective of preventing financial crime. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on the client's self-certification without independent verification, bypasses crucial risk assessment steps mandated by regulatory guidance, exposing BidCorp to significant compliance failures. Furthermore, an approach that seeks to expedite the process by overlooking standard checks, even with senior management approval, would still constitute a breach of regulatory obligations and internal controls, undermining the firm's commitment to compliance and ethical conduct. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Identifying the core regulatory requirements and internal policies applicable to the situation. 2. Assessing the potential risks and consequences of deviating from these requirements. 3. Consulting with relevant internal stakeholders, such as the compliance department, to ensure all perspectives are considered. 4. Prioritizing compliance and ethical considerations over short-term business pressures. 5. Documenting all decisions and the rationale behind them. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are pursued within a robust framework of regulatory adherence and ethical responsibility. Question 7. Risk assessment procedures indicate that BidCorp employees may hold personal investments that could create potential conflicts of interest. Which of the following approaches best addresses this risk in compliance with regulatory expectations? Option A. Develop a clear, documented policy that defines specific categories of investments and reporting thresholds based on employee roles and access to sensitive information, requiring pre-clearance or disclosure for those that present a material risk of conflict. Option B. Rely on employees to voluntarily report any potential conflicts of interest they identify in their personal investments to their direct managers on an informal basis. Option C. Implement a comprehensive policy requiring employees to pre-clear all personal investment transactions and disclose all holdings, regardless of size or type. To the compliance department, Option D. Disregard personal investment disclosures, assuming that employees are aware of and will adhere to BidCorp's code of conduct regarding conflicts of interest. Correct answer is C. Implement a comprehensive policy requiring employees to pre-clear all personal investment transactions and disclose all holdings, regardless of size or type, to the compliance department. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because BidCorp's compliance department is tasked with identifying and mitigating potential conflicts of interest arising from employee personal investments. The challenge lies in balancing the need for robust oversight with respecting employee privacy and avoiding overly burdensome reporting requirements. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the procedures are effective without being unduly intrusive or impractical. The correct approach involves establishing a clear, documented policy that outlines specific types of investments that must be pre-cleared or disclosed based on the employee's role and access to sensitive information. This policy should define what constitutes a material investment and provide a framework for employees to report potential conflicts. This aligns with regulatory expectations for firms to have effective systems and controls in place to manage conflicts of interest, as mandated by insert relevant UK/SISI regulation, e.g., FCA Handbook, COBS 2, 3A or similar, focusing on firm obligations for managing conflicts. Ethically, it promotes transparency and fairness within the firm. An incorrect approach would be to require all employees to disclose every single personal investment, regardless of its nature or potential impact. This is overly broad, impractical to manage, and infringes on employee privacy without a clear regulatory or business justification. It fails to target the actual risks of conflicts of interest. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on ad hoc, verbal reporting of potential conflicts. This lacks documentation, consistency, and accountability, making it difficult to track, assess, and manage risks effectively. It also fails to meet the regulatory requirement for documented policies and procedures for conflict management. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore potential conflicts of interest altogether, assuming employees will act ethically. This demonstrates a severe lack of due diligence and a failure to implement necessary controls, exposing Bid Corp to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. It directly contravenes the firm's responsibility to proactively manage conflicts. Professionals should employ a risk-based approach to developing and implementing conflict of interest policies. This involves understanding the specific business activities of Bid Corp, the roles and responsibilities of its employees, and the types of information to which they have access. The policy should be tailored to these risks, clearly communicated to all staff, and regularly reviewed and updated to remain effective. A structured process for reporting, reviewing, and resolving identified conflicts is essential. Question 8. When evaluating a situation where a Bid Corp employee overhears a conversation suggesting a potential acquisition involving a major client, and a client subsequently inquires about any market-moving news that might affect their portfolio, what is the most appropriate course of action for the Bid Corp employee? Option A. Discuss the overheard information with a senior colleague within Bid Corp to get their opinion before responding to the client. Option B. Inform the client that the information is confidential and cannot be shared, and escalate the matter to Bid Corp's compliance department for guidance. Option C. Share the overheard information with the client, explaining that it is not yet public but could be beneficial for their investment decisions. Option D. Advise the client that there is no significant news and that they should continue with their current investment strategy. The correct answer is B. Inform the client that the information is confidential and cannot be shared, and escalate the matter to Bid Corp's compliance department for guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Bid Corp employees due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the need to prevent potential market abuse. The pressure to share information that could be perceived as material non-public information, MNPI, requires careful judgment to uphold regulatory obligations and ethical standards. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to Bid Corp's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines concerning MNPI. This means recognizing that the information about the potential acquisition is likely MNPI and therefore cannot be shared with external parties, including clients, until it is publicly disclosed. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the principles of market integrity and fair dealing, which are paramount in financial services. Specifically, regulations such as those governing insider dealing and market abuse prohibit the communication of MNPI to others in circumstances where it is likely to result in that other person, or any other person, engaging in or procuring others to engage in insider dealing. Holding client confidentiality is important, but it is secondary to the overriding regulatory duty to prevent market abuse. An incorrect approach would be to share the information with the client, believing that it is in their best interest to be informed. This fails to recognize the regulatory prohibition against disseminating MNPI and could expose both the employee and the client to severe penalties for insider dealing or market abuse. The ethical failure lies in prioritizing a perceived client benefit over a clear regulatory mandate designed to protect the broader market. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the information as insignificant or not truly MNPI without proper assessment. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of what constitutes MNPI and the potential consequences of misclassification. The regulatory failure is in not exercising due diligence to identify and manage MNPI, thereby risking its improper disclosure. A further incorrect approach would be to share the information with a trusted colleague at Bid Corp for a second opinion, without first consulting the compliance department. While seeking internal advice is generally good practice, bypassing the designated compliance function for MNPI-related queries is a significant procedural and regulatory failure. Compliance departments are specifically equipped to provide guidance on these sensitive matters, and their involvement is a critical step in ensuring adherence to regulations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Bid Corp's policies on MNPI and market abuse. When faced with potentially sensitive information, the first step should always be to assess whether it constitutes MNPI. If there is any doubt, the information should be treated as MNPI. The next step is to consult Bid Corp's compliance department for definitive guidance. Under no circumstances should MNPI be shared with external parties, or even internally outside of authorized channels, until it has been publicly disclosed or specific clearance has been obtained from compliance. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Bid Corp hiring manager has a close personal friendship with a candidate applying for a senior role within the company. The hiring manager is responsible for overseeing the interview process and making a final recommendation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the hiring manager to take? Option A. Immediately recuse themselves from all aspects of the hiring process for this candidate and inform their direct supervisor of the personal relationship. Option B. Inform the candidate of the personal relationship and ask them to withdraw their application. Option C. Delegate the interview and recommendation responsibilities to a trusted colleague without disclosing the personal relationship. Option D. Proceed with the hiring process, ensuring they remain objective and fair in their assessment of the candidate. The correct answer is A. Immediately recuse themselves from all aspects of the hiring process for this candidate and inform their direct supervisor of the personal relationship. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Bid Corp employees by requiring them to navigate a potential conflict of interest that could compromise the integrity of their hiring process. The challenge lies in identifying and appropriately managing situations where personal relationships might unduly influence professional judgment, thereby risking regulatory breaches and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to uphold Bid Corp's commitment to fair and objective hiring practices. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively identifying the personal relationship and then recusing oneself from any part of the hiring process for the candidate. This upholds the principle of impartiality and avoids any perception of favoritism. This aligns with the ethical guidelines of professional conduct, which mandate avoiding conflicts of interest and ensuring that all decisions are made objectively and in the best interest of the organization. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit of fair employment practices and the need to maintain a level playing field for all applicants, preventing any undue advantage. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the hiring process as normal, assuming personal bias can be managed. This fails to acknowledge the inherent risk of unconscious bias and the appearance of impropriety, potentially violating internal policies on conflicts of interest and external regulations promoting fair hiring. Another incorrect approach is to inform the candidate about the personal relationship and ask them to withdraw their application. This places an undue burden on the candidate and does not resolve the conflict of interest from Bid Corp's perspective. It merely shifts the responsibility. It also risks creating an uncomfortable situation and could be seen as an attempt to circumvent proper conflict resolution procedures. A further incorrect approach is to delegate the decision-making to a colleague without disclosing the personal relationship. This is a failure of transparency and does not resolve the conflict of interest. The colleague would be making a decision without full information, and if the relationship were later discovered, it would cast doubt on the entire hiring process and Bid Corp's commitment to ethical practices. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a framework that prioritizes transparency, objectivity, and adherence to organizational policies and ethical standards. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the first step is to identify it. Subsequently, the professional should consult relevant internal policies and seek guidance from their supervisor or the appropriate compliance department. The decision-making process should always aim to eliminate or mitigate the conflict in a way that preserves the integrity of the process and avoids any appearance of impropriety. Question 10. Analysis of a situation where a Bid Corp analyst receives an unsolicited inquiry from a prominent industry journalist seeking specific, non-public details about a recent, significant client transaction that Bid Corp facilitated. The journalist implies that this information, if released, could significantly impact the market perception of the client company. Option A. Immediately provide the journalist with the requested transaction details, emphasizing Bid Corp's efficiency and client success. Option B. Consult Bid Corp's compliance department to understand the regulatory implications and internal policies regarding the disclosure of such information before responding to the journalist. Option C. Politely decline to comment, stating that BidCorp adheres to strict client confidentiality policies and cannot disclose information about specific transactions. Option D. Offer the journalist a generalized overview of the types of transactions BidCorp handles, without referencing the specific client or deal. The correct answer is A. Immediately provide the journalist with the requested transaction details, emphasizing BidCorp's efficiency and client success. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a BidCorp employee due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the need to maintain market integrity. The employee must navigate the delicate balance of providing information that could be perceived as market-moving without breaching their duty of care to BidCorp's clients or engaging in prohibited conduct. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions align with the regulatory framework governing financial markets and professional conduct. The correct approach involves a measured response that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. This approach would involve seeking clarification from the compliance department regarding the specific nature of the information requested and its potential impact. It would also entail a thorough review of BidCorp's internal policies on information disclosure and client confidentiality. By engaging with the compliance team, the employee ensures that any disclosure, if deemed appropriate and permissible, is handled in a manner that upholds regulatory standards and protects client interests. This aligns with the principles of responsible market conduct and the duty to act with integrity. An incorrect approach would be to directly provide the requested information without consulting compliance. This action risks violating client confidentiality agreements and potentially contravening regulations related to the dissemination of non-public information that could influence market prices. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the request entirely. While this avoids direct breach, it could be seen as uncooperative and may lead to misunderstandings or missed opportunities for BidCorp if the information requested was benign and could have been shared appropriately. A third incorrect approach is to speculate or provide incomplete information. This is professionally unsound as it introduces uncertainty and could lead to misinterpretations, potentially causing market disruption or reputational damage to BidCorp. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, identify the core issue and potential conflicts of interest or regulatory breaches. Second, consult internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. Third, seek advice from the appropriate internal departments, such as compliance or legal. Fourth, document all communications and decisions. Finally, act in a manner that upholds the highest ethical standards and regulatory requirements, prioritizing transparency and integrity. Question 11. System analysis indicates that a key client of BidCorp has requested to execute a series of large, time-sensitive trades based on information they claim to have received from a confidential source within a publicly listed company. The client is insistent on immediate execution, stating that the information is crucial for their investment strategy and will expire soon. As the BidCorp compliance officer, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Inform the client that BidCorp cannot act on information that may constitute inside information and refuse to execute the trades. Option B. Immediately execute the trades as requested by the client to maintain a good client relationship and meet their urgent needs. Option C. Initiate a documented internal review to understand the nature of the information, its source, and its potential materiality before proceeding with any execution. Option D. Politely decline the request and suggest the client seek advice from another firm that may be more accommodating. The correct answer is B. Immediately execute the trades as requested by the client to maintain a good client relationship and meet their urgent needs. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires BidCorp's compliance officer to navigate a potential conflict between a client's request and regulatory obligations. The core challenge lies in ensuring that BidCorp's actions do not inadvertently facilitate market abuse or insider dealing, which are strictly prohibited under the regulatory framework governing BidCorp. The compliance officer must exercise careful judgment to uphold the integrity of the financial markets and BidCorp's reputation. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation into the client's request, focusing on the source of the information and its potential materiality. This approach is right because it directly addresses the regulatory requirement to prevent insider dealing and market manipulation. By seeking clarification and assessing the nature of the information, BidCorp demonstrates due diligence and adherence to its anti-market abuse policies. This proactive stance ensures that BidCorp does not become complicit in any illicit activity, thereby protecting itself and the market. An incorrect approach would be to immediately fulfill the client's request without further inquiry. This fails to meet the regulatory obligation to identify and prevent potential market abuse. It exposes BidCorp to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the request outright without understanding its context or the client's intent. While seemingly cautious, this could alienate a client and miss an opportunity to educate them on regulatory boundaries, potentially leading to future misunderstandings. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the client's assurance that the information is not inside information. This demonstrates a lack of independent verification and a failure to exercise professional skepticism, which is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding the regulatory landscape and BidCorp's internal policies. 2. Carefully assessing any client request for potential red flags related to market abuse. 3. Seeking clarification and gathering sufficient information to make an informed decision. 4. Documenting all steps taken and the rationale behind the decision. 5. Escalating complex or high-risk situations to senior management or legal counsel. Question 12. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of trading activity in a specific security by an employee of BidCorp that deviates significantly from their historical trading behavior and occurs shortly before a major company announcement. This deviation has been flagged as potentially suspicious. What is the most appropriate immediate next step for the BidCorp compliance team? Option A. Advise the employee to cease all trading activities immediately pending a full review without providing specific reasons. Option B. Immediately report the flagged trading activity to the relevant regulatory authority without conducting any internal review. Option C. Dismiss the flagged activity as a potential system error and take no further action unless further alerts are generated. Option D. Initiate a confidential internal investigation to gather all relevant trading data, communication records, and any other pertinent information to assess the nature of the trading activity. The correct answer is D. Initiate a confidential internal investigation to gather all relevant trading data, communication records, and any other pertinent information to assess the nature of the trading activity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for BidCorp employees due to the potential for market abuse and the need to uphold regulatory integrity. The monitoring system has flagged unusual trading activity that could indicate insider trading or market manipulation, both of which are serious offenses under the relevant regulatory framework. The challenge lies in interpreting the data accurately, understanding the nuances of market conduct rules, and taking appropriate action without causing undue disruption or making premature accusations. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for swift action with the principle of fairness and due process. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation into the flagged activity. This means gathering all relevant information, including trading records, communication logs, and any other pertinent data, to determine if a breach of regulations has occurred. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principles of due diligence and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it aligns with the regulatory obligation to identify, investigate, and report potential market abuse. By conducting a comprehensive review, BidCorp can ensure that any action taken is based on solid evidence, thereby protecting the integrity of the market and fulfilling its supervisory responsibilities. This methodical process is essential for maintaining trust and confidence in the financial markets. An incorrect approach would be to immediately report the activity to the regulator without conducting an internal investigation. This is incorrect because it bypasses the firm's responsibility to conduct its own due diligence and could lead to unnecessary regulatory scrutiny or reputational damage if the flagged activity turns out to be benign. It also fails to demonstrate a proactive internal control environment. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the flagged activity, assuming it is a false positive or not significant enough to warrant attention. This is incorrect because it represents a failure to comply with regulatory obligations to monitor for and investigate suspicious activity. Such inaction could result in significant penalties for Corp and its employees if the activity is indeed a breach of market abuse regulations. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to regulatory compliance and market integrity. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to confront the individuals involved based solely on the monitoring system's alert without gathering sufficient evidence. This is incorrect because it could lead to wrongful accusations, damage professional relationships, and potentially alert individuals to an ongoing investigation, allowing them to conceal further wrongdoing. It also fails to follow established procedures for handling potential regulatory breaches. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes evidence-based investigation. This involves 1. Acknowledging the alert and its potential seriousness. 2. Initiating a confidential internal review to gather all relevant facts. 3. Analyzing the gathered information against established regulatory rules and internal policies. 4. Consulting with compliance and legal departments as necessary. 5. Determining the appropriate course of action based on the findings, which may include further investigation, reporting to the regulator, or closing the matter if no breach is found. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and ethically sound. Question 13. Research into a recent transaction processed by Corp has revealed a pattern of activity that, while not definitively illegal, raises significant concerns regarding potential money laundering. The client, a long-standing and valuable customer, has expressed a desire for discretion regarding their financial dealings. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Corp employee handling this account? Option A. Disregard the transaction as it is not definitively illegal and the client values discretion to avoid jeopardizing the client relationship. Option B. Delay reporting the transaction to the relevant regulatory body until further information can be gathered to confirm the illegality to avoid unnecessary reporting. Option C. Report the transaction to the relevant regulatory body without informing the client to maintain client confidentiality and avoid potential conflict. Option D. Immediately file a suspicious activity report (SAR) with the relevant regulatory body and inform the client that Corp is legally obligated to report such transactions, explaining the general nature of the reporting requirement without disclosing specific suspicions. The correct answer is D. Immediately file a suspicious activity report (SAR) with the relevant regulatory body and inform the client that Corp is legally obligated to report such transactions, explaining the general nature of the reporting requirement without disclosing specific suspicions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Corp employees due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the need to comply with regulatory reporting obligations. The requirement for careful judgment stems from the potential for both breaching client trust and facing regulatory sanctions if handled improperly. The correct approach involves promptly and accurately reporting the suspicious transaction to the relevant regulatory authority, while simultaneously informing the client of the reporting obligation in a transparent and professional manner. This upholds Corp's commitment to regulatory compliance, specifically the anti-money laundering (AML) and counter-terrorist financing (CTF) obligations, which mandate the reporting of suspicious activities. Ethically, it demonstrates integrity and a commitment to preventing financial crime. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the suspicious activity, fearing client repercussions. This failure directly contravenes regulatory requirements to report suspicious transactions, exposing Corp and its employees to significant penalties, including fines and reputational damage. It also undermines the broader efforts to combat financial crime. Another incorrect approach would be to report the transaction without informing the client. While this fulfills the reporting obligation, it can damage the client relationship and may be perceived as a breach of trust if the client later discovers the report. Professional practice often encourages transparency where possible, without compromising the integrity of the investigation. A further incorrect approach would be to delay reporting until further information is gathered, hoping the transaction resolves itself. This delay can be interpreted as willful blindness or a failure to act promptly, which is a serious regulatory offense. The obligation is to report based on suspicion, not certainty. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific reporting thresholds and triggers outlined in the relevant regulations, maintaining a clear understanding of client confidentiality obligations and their limitations when regulatory reporting is mandated, and developing clear internal procedures for escalating and reporting suspicious activities. When faced with a suspicious transaction, the immediate step should be to document the suspicion, consult internal compliance policies, and initiate the reporting process as required by law, while considering the most professional and transparent way to communicate with the client about the reporting obligation. Question 14. Governance review demonstrates that Bid Corp's proposed bid for the new infrastructure project may have inadvertently included proprietary information obtained from a competitor during a previous, unrelated engagement. This information, if used in the current bid, could be construed as an unfair competitive advantage and a breach of the Bid Corp hiring assessment test's guidelines on fair bidding practices. The compliance officer must decide on the immediate course of action. Option A. Attempt to discreetly remove the proprietary information from the bid documents internally before submission, without informing any oversight bodies. Option B. Immediately escalate the potential breach to the Bid Corp Ethics Committee and engage external legal counsel specializing in regulatory compliance for the Bid Corp hiring assessment test framework. Option C. Proceed with the bid submission as planned, but instruct the bid team to avoid referencing the specific competitor information during any subsequent negotiations. Option D. Wait for the regulatory body overseeing the Bid Corp hiring assessment test to initiate an inquiry before taking any action regarding the bid. The correct answer is B. Immediately escalate the potential breach to the Bid Corp Ethics Committee and engage external legal counsel specializing in regulatory compliance for the Bid Corp hiring assessment test framework. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Bid Corp's compliance officer to balance the company's desire for growth and market share with the stringent regulatory requirements of the Bid Corp hiring assessment test framework. The pressure to secure a new contract, coupled with the potential for significant financial gain, could lead to overlooking or downplaying compliance issues. The officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure that all actions taken are not only commercially beneficial, but also fully compliant with the established regulatory framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the identified potential breach to the relevant internal committee and seeking external legal counsel. This is the most appropriate professional response because the Bid Corp hiring assessment test framework mandates a proactive and transparent approach to potential regulatory noncompliance. Escalation ensures that the issue is reviewed by individuals with the appropriate expertise and authority, and seeking legal counsel guarantees that Bid Corp receives advice grounded in the specific regulatory framework, minimizing the risk of further violations and potential penalties. This aligns with the principle of upholding regulatory integrity and demonstrating due diligence. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that involves attempting to rectify the issue internally without formal escalation or external advice is professionally unacceptable. This risks inadequate remediation, potential concealment of the breach, and a failure to adhere to the reporting and investigation protocols stipulated by the Bid Corp hiring assessment test framework. It bypasses the necessary oversight and expertise, potentially leading to more severe consequences if the issue is later discovered. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the contract negotiation while downplaying the identified issue, hoping it will not be discovered. This is a direct violation of ethical principles and regulatory requirements. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and a willingness to engage in potentially fraudulent or misleading practices, which can result in severe reputational damage, financial penalties, and legal repercussions for Bid Corp and the individuals involved. Finally, an approach that involves delaying any action until a formal inquiry is initiated is also professionally unsound. The Bid Corp hiring assessment test framework emphasizes prompt action and self-reporting when potential breaches are identified. Procrastination can be interpreted as an attempt to obstruct an investigation or a lack of commitment to compliance, exacerbating the severity of any eventual findings. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, they must thoroughly understand the specific requirements of the relevant regulatory framework, in this case, the Bid Corp hiring assessment test. Second, they should objectively assess the identified issue against these requirements. Third, they must consider the potential consequences of different actions, both in terms of regulatory compliance and business impact. Finally, they should prioritize actions that uphold regulatory integrity, transparency, and ethical conduct, even if these actions present short-term commercial challenges. Escalation and seeking expert advice are crucial steps in this process to ensure informed and compliant decision-making. Question 15. Comparative studies suggest that firms often face ethical dilemmas when dealing with potentially market-sensitive information received from clients. Bid Corp has been engaged by a client to advise on a significant corporate transaction. During a preliminary discussion, a Bid Corp associate inadvertently overhears a conversation between two senior individuals from the client company discussing details of the transaction that, if publicly known, could significantly impact the stock price of a publicly traded entity not directly involved in the transaction, but which is a major competitor. The associate is concerned that this information might be considered material non-public information. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Bid Corp associate and the firm in this situation? Option A. Immediately report the overheard conversation to the relevant regulatory authority and cease all work for the client. Option B. Continue with the advisory work for the client as planned, assuming the overheard information is not directly relevant to Bid Corp's advisory role and therefore not a concern. Option C. Acknowledge the potential sensitivity of the overheard information to the client, request clarification on its nature and public availability, and simultaneously initiate an internal review with Bid Corp's compliance department to assess any potential regulatory or ethical concerns. Option D. Discreetly gather more information about the overheard conversation to confirm its materiality, and then, without informing the client, conduct an internal assessment of potential regulatory implications. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the overheard conversation to the relevant regulatory authority and cease all work for the client. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Bid Corp employees due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the need to maintain market integrity. The firm's reputation and legal standing are at risk if sensitive information is mishandled. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing interests, ensuring that Bid Corp adheres to its ethical obligations and regulatory requirements. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent communication strategy with the client, coupled with a rigorous internal review process. This demonstrates Bid Corp's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance by acknowledging the potential issue, seeking clarification from the client, and initiating an internal investigation to verify the information. This aligns with the principles of acting with integrity and due diligence, as expected under relevant financial regulations, which emphasize preventing market abuse and insider dealing. By engaging the client and conducting an internal review, Bid Corp mitigates the risk of inadvertently facilitating or participating in any prohibited activity. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the information or to act on it without proper verification or client consultation. Ignoring the information would be a failure to exercise due diligence and could lead to regulatory sanctions if the information later proves to be material and was acted upon by others. Acting on the information without verification or client consultation would be a direct breach of client confidentiality and could constitute market abuse or insider dealing, depending on the nature of the information and the actions taken. This would expose Bid Corp to severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying potential conflicts or red flags. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. 3. Seeking clarification from appropriate internal stakeholders, e.g., compliance department. 4. Communicating transparently and professionally with the client while respecting confidentiality. 5. Documenting all actions and decisions. This structured approach ensures that decisions are well-reasoned, defensible, and uphold the highest professional standards. Question 16. The control framework reveals that an employee at Bid Corp, responsible for evaluating vendor proposals for a significant new project, has a close personal friendship with the principal of one of the bidding companies. The employee is aware of this relationship and its potential to influence their professional judgment. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee to take? Option A. Proceed with the evaluation as planned, confident in their ability to remain objective and make a decision based solely on merit. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct manager and the compliance department and seek guidance on recusal from the evaluation process. Option C. Inform their friend about the evaluation process and the criteria so the friend can tailor their proposal to better meet BidCorp's needs. Option D. Subtly steer the evaluation criteria or scoring to ensure their friend's bid is favorably considered, while still appearing objective. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct manager and the compliance department, and seek guidance on recusal from the evaluation process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at BidCorp to navigate a potential conflict of interest while adhering to the company's internal control framework and relevant regulatory guidelines. The core difficulty lies in balancing personal relationships with professional obligations and ensuring that all decisions are made in the best interest of BidCorp and its stakeholders, free from undue influence. Careful judgment is required to identify and manage such conflicts proactively. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the personal relationship to the appropriate authority within BidCorp, as stipulated by the company's code of conduct, and any applicable regulatory requirements concerning conflicts of interest. This proactive disclosure allows BidCorp's management or compliance department to assess the situation, implement appropriate mitigation strategies, such as recusal from decision-making processes or oversight, and ensure that the procurement process remains fair, transparent, and compliant. This aligns with the ethical imperative to act with integrity and avoid even the appearance of impropriety, as often mandated by regulatory bodies overseeing corporate governance and financial conduct. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the evaluation without disclosure would constitute a significant ethical and regulatory failure. It breaches the trust placed in the employee by BidCorp and its stakeholders and violates the fundamental principles of good corporate governance, which demand transparency and accountability. This failure could lead to biased decision-making, potentially resulting in suboptimal outcomes for BidCorp, such as awarding contracts based on personal connections rather than merit or value. Such actions could also expose BidCorp to regulatory scrutiny and penalties if the undisclosed conflict leads to a breach of procurement regulations or market abuse rules. Another incorrect approach, that of subtly influencing the evaluation to favor the acquaintance's bid, is even more egregious. This represents a direct act of misconduct, undermining the integrity of the entire procurement process. It is a clear violation of ethical standards and likely contravenes specific regulations designed to prevent fraud, corruption, and unfair competition. The consequences of such an action could include severe disciplinary measures for the employee, reputational damage to BidCorp, and legal repercussions for both the individual and the company. The professional reasoning process for handling such situation should involve a clear understanding of BidCorp's internal policies on conflicts of interest and ethical conduct. Upon identifying a potential conflict, the immediate step should be to consult these policies. If a conflict is confirmed or suspected, the next step is to disclose it promptly and fully to the designated person or department, e.g., line manager, compliance officer, or HR. This disclosure should be followed by adherence to any instructions or procedures put in place by BidCorp to manage the conflict, which may include recusal from relevant discussions or decisions. This systematic approach ensures that professional integrity is maintained and regulatory compliance is upheld. Question 17. Regulatory review indicates that a junior analyst at BidCorp has observed unusual trading patterns in a client's portfolio that appear to correlate with recent non-public information they overheard being discussed by senior management. The analyst is concerned about potential insider trading, but is also aware of BidCorp's strict client confidentiality agreements. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the junior analyst? Option A. Directly confront the client about the unusual trading activity and the overheard information to seek clarification. Option B. Discuss the suspicions and overheard information with other colleagues in the trading department to gauge their opinions. Option C. Immediately report the observed trading patterns and overheard information through BidCorp's internal whistleblowing or compliance reporting channel. Option D. Ignore the observations to avoid potential client repercussions and maintain the firm's relationship with the client. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the observed trading patterns and overheard information through BidCorp's internal whistleblowing or compliance reporting channel. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for BidCorp employees due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the need to report potential regulatory breaches. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of the firm's ethical obligations and the regulatory framework governing its operations. The core tension lies in balancing the duty to protect client information with the imperative to uphold market integrity and comply with legal requirements. A failure to correctly identify and act upon a potential breach can lead to significant reputational damage, regulatory sanctions, and loss of client trust. The correct approach involves a structured, confidential internal reporting mechanism that prioritizes regulatory compliance while safeguarding client data. This approach is right because it adheres to the principle of acting with integrity and in the best interests of both the client and the regulatory environment. Specifically, it aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on proactive identification and reporting of suspicious activities to the appropriate authorities, thereby preventing potential harm to the market. This process ensures that any allegations are investigated thoroughly and impartially, without prejudicing the client unnecessarily or violating confidentiality agreements prematurely. An incorrect approach that involves directly confronting the client with suspicions without internal consultation or reporting is professionally unacceptable. This action could breach client confidentiality, potentially tip off individuals involved in illicit activities, and bypass the firm's established compliance procedures. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the firm's internal controls and the proper channels for escalating regulatory concerns. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the suspicious activity due to a desire to avoid conflict or potential client dissatisfaction, is also professionally flawed. This inaction constitutes a failure to uphold the firm's regulatory obligations and ethical duties. It creates a risk that a breach may continue unchecked, leading to more significant consequences for the firm and the market. A third incorrect approach, which is to discuss the suspicions broadly with colleagues not involved in compliance or oversight, violates client confidentiality and the firm's internal policies on sensitive information. This gossip or informal discussion can lead to misinformation, damage reputations, and undermine the integrity of any subsequent investigation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Recognizing potential red flags that indicate a possible regulatory breach. 2. Consulting the firm's internal compliance policies and procedures for reporting such concerns. 3. Escalating the matter through the designated confidential channels to the compliance department or a designated compliance officer. 4. Cooperating fully with the internal investigation, providing all necessary information while respecting client confidentiality. 5. Allowing the compliance department to manage external reporting and client communication as per regulatory requirements. Question 18. Consider a scenario where a BidCorp employee is working on a potential acquisition and a key stakeholder from the target company requests specific, non-public financial projections that are considered highly confidential. The employee believes this information is crucial for BidCorp to accurately assess the deal's viability. What is the most appropriate course of action for the BidCorp employee? Option A. Directly share the financial projections with a trusted colleague within BidCorp to get their opinion before deciding whether to share with the stakeholder. Option B. Escalate the request to the appropriate internal authority within BidCorp, such as the compliance department or legal counsel, to seek guidance and authorization before sharing any information. Option C. Refuse to share any information, citing client confidentiality, and inform the stakeholder that BidCorp cannot proceed with the request. Option D. Immediately share the requested financial projections with the stakeholder, as the information is vital for the deal's progression. The correct answer is D. Immediately share the requested financial projections with the stakeholder, as the information is vital for the deal's progression. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires Bid Corp employees to navigate potential conflicts of interest and maintain client confidentiality, while also adhering to internal policies and regulatory requirements. The core tension lies in balancing the need for information sharing to facilitate a transaction with the obligation to protect sensitive client data and avoid any perception of impropriety. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions are transparent, ethical, and compliant with the Bid Corp hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a structured and documented process of seeking internal approval and guidance before sharing any confidential information. This demonstrates a commitment to due diligence, risk mitigation, and adherence to regulatory mandates. Specifically, by escalating the request through the designated channels within Bid Corp, the employee ensures that the sharing of information is authorized, its necessity is assessed by appropriate personnel, and safeguards are put in place to protect client confidentiality. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which typically mandate robust internal controls and approval processes for handling sensitive client data. An incorrect approach of directly sharing the information without authorization would constitute a serious breach of client confidentiality and potentially violate data protection regulations. This action bypasses necessary oversight and risk assessment, exposing Bid Corp and its clients to significant legal and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, that of refusing to share any information whatsoever, even after internal consultation, could hinder legitimate business operations and potentially breach contractual obligations if the information is crucial for the transaction's success, and its sharing is deemed appropriate and authorized. This rigid stance, without exploring authorized avenues, demonstrates a lack of understanding of business needs and collaborative problem-solving within a regulated environment. Finally, an incorrect approach of sharing the information with a colleague outside of the designated approval process, even with good intentions, still circumvents established protocols and creates an unauthorized channel for sensitive data, leading to similar confidentiality and compliance risks. Professionals in similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the regulatory landscape, identifying potential conflicts of interest, and adhering to internal policies. This involves a step-by-step process. First, clearly identifying the nature of the information requested and its sensitivity. Second, consulting Bid Corp's internal policies and procedures regarding information sharing and client confidentiality. Third, if uncertainty exists or if the request involves sensitive data, escalating the matter to the appropriate internal authority, e.g., Compliance Department Legal Counsel, or a designated manager, for review and approval. And fourth, documenting all communications and decisions made throughout the process. This systematic approach ensures that actions are not only compliant but also ethically sound and in the best interest of all stakeholders. Question 19. The assessment process reveals that during a recent case study exercise, you inadvertently accessed a document containing highly sensitive, non-public information about an upcoming strategic acquisition by Bid Corp. This information was not intended to be part of the assessment materials. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Continue reviewing the document to fully understand the implications of the acquisition for Bid Corp's future strategy before reporting it. Option B. Discreetly share the information with a trusted colleague who works in Bid Corp's corporate development team to get their perspective on its significance. Option C. Immediately cease reviewing the document and report its existence and nature to the Bid Corp Compliance Department through the designated internal reporting channel without further investigation or dissemination. Option D. Delete the document and pretend you never saw it to avoid any potential complications. Correct answer is C. Immediately cease reviewing the document and report its existence and nature to the Bid Corp Compliance Department through the designated internal reporting channel without further investigation or dissemination. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect client confidentiality and prevent market abuse. The assessment process has uncovered potential insider information, and the candidate's response will demonstrate their understanding of their duties and the potential consequences of mishandling such sensitive data. Careful judgment is required to act responsibly without jeopardizing the integrity of the hiring process or violating regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the discovered information through the designated internal channels, as per Bid Corp's established policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. This demonstrates an understanding of the seriousness of potential insider information and the necessity of following proper procedures for investigation and containment. This approach aligns with regulatory requirements that mandate firms to have systems in place to detect and prevent market abuse, and for employees to report suspicious activities. It prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct by ensuring the information is handled by the appropriate compliance and legal teams within Bid Corp, who are equipped to assess its materiality and take necessary actions. An incorrect approach of attempting to further investigate or use the information for personal gain would be a severe regulatory and ethical failure. Attempting to investigate independently could lead to unauthorized access, data breaches, and potential obstruction of a formal investigation. Using the information, even if not directly for trading, could be construed as a breach of confidentiality and potentially lead to accusations of market manipulation or insider dealing, depending on the nature of the information and its impact on Bid Corp's operations or stock price. Another incorrect approach of ignoring the information or downplaying its significance would also be a failure. This would violate the duty to report potential breaches of regulations and company policy, leaving Bid Corp exposed to regulatory scrutiny and reputational damage. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and an unwillingness to uphold ethical standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to company policy and regulatory mandates. When faced with potentially sensitive or non-public information, the first step should always be to consult internal policies and procedures. If a situation involves potential regulatory breaches or ethical dilemmas, reporting through the established whistleblowing or compliance channels is paramount. This ensures that the matter is handled by those with the authority and expertise to address it appropriately, safeguarding both the individual and the firm from legal and ethical repercussions. Question 20. The investigation demonstrates that a Bid Corp analyst, while reviewing trading activity for a key client, has identified a pattern of trades that appear to be coordinated and potentially manipulative, occurring just before a significant company announcement by that client. The analyst is concerned about potential insider dealing or market manipulation, but is also aware of the strict client confidentiality agreements in place. Option A. Immediately report the suspicious trading activity to Bid Corp's compliance department and await their guidance on further steps. Option B. Inform the client directly about the analyst's concerns to understand their trading strategy and intentions. Option C. Continue to monitor the client's trading activity discreetly and gather more evidence before reporting anything to avoid alarming the client. Option D. Share the analyst's suspicions with colleagues in other departments to get their opinions on the situation. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the suspicious trading activity to Bid Corp's compliance department and await their guidance on further steps. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Bid Corp employees due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the need to comply with regulatory reporting obligations. The requirement to act with integrity and uphold the reputation of the financial services industry, as mandated by the Bid Corp hiring assessment tests governing framework, is paramount. Employees must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing interests, ensuring that all actions are transparent, ethical, and legally sound. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the situation to the designated compliance officer or legal department within Bid Corp. This is the most appropriate professional response because it adheres strictly to internal policies and regulatory guidelines that mandate reporting of potential market abuse. By involving the compliance function, Bid Corp ensures that the matter is handled by trained professionals who understand the nuances of market abuse regulations and can initiate the appropriate investigation and reporting procedures without compromising the integrity of the ongoing investigation or client confidentiality unnecessarily. This approach upholds the principle of acting with due skill, care, and diligence, and demonstrates a commitment to market integrity. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the suspicious activity, believing it to be a minor issue or outside of one's direct responsibility. This failure to act violates the fundamental duty to report suspicious transactions, which is a cornerstone of market abuse regulations. It exposes Bid Corp to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to confront the client directly or attempt to investigate the matter independently without involving the compliance department. This could prejudice any formal investigation, breach client confidentiality in an unauthorized manner, and potentially lead to the destruction of evidence. Furthermore, it bypasses the established internal controls designed to manage such sensitive situations, demonstrating a lack of professional judgment and adherence to established procedures. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, identify the core issue and any potential conflicts with regulatory obligations or ethical principles. Second, consult internal policies and procedures, particularly those related to compliance and reporting. Third, if uncertainty exists or a potential breach is identified, escalate the matter to the appropriate internal authority, such as the compliance or legal department, without delay. Fourth, document all actions taken and communications related to the situation. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and ethically sound, protecting both the individual and the firm.